Hello, everybody. This is Melinda George with the National Commission on Teaching in America's Future. I want to welcome all of you here today. We're very appreciative of your taking this time and coming, and we're hoping that you're coming with lots of questions for us to answer. Ryan, if you can switch to the next slide. The agenda for today, our format is a little bit different than we've used before. We're actually calling this a web chat, and we're going to be using this time together for a web-enabled conversation and an opportunity for those of you participating in our Agents for Learning competition to have your questions answered. These can be questions about ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, or about the competition itself. We're happy to try and answer as best we can. If there's anything that we can't answer, we promise to find the answers as well. I'm going to start off with some introductions of our experts. I then want to just provide a couple of updates and places where you can find some resources about the competition, and then we'll be ready to take off with this web chat. Next slide, Ryan. I don't know if everybody's slides are switching. Mine don't look like they're switching.
You don't see the agenda of a panelist?
No, mine still says welcome, but that's okay. As long as everyone else sees the right thing, we'll just keep going. If we could be on the slide that says answering your questions. Yeah, I'm seeing that the slides aren't moving, Ryan.
I agree. They're not moving for Seth either, but it's on the correct slide on my screen.
Maybe I need to do it. Oh, look at that.
Oh,
now
great. Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Sure. I guess I'm the presenter. I'm excited to introduce our experts who are on the phone today and who will be fielding your questions. They are a very talented group with very long resumes, but I'm going to give them a bit of a short shrift so that you can hear more from them and less from me. Our first panelist is Stephanie Hirsch, who's the Executive Director of Learning Forward and my partner in leading the Agents for Learning competition. Stephanie has been with Learning Forward for many years, helping to ensure that teachers are able to get the strongest professional learning possible. She is one of the most knowledgeable people that I know when it comes to professional learning. Joining Stephanie from Learning Forward, and you'll see them shift the laptop back and forth, is Janice Poda. Janice is a senior consultant with Learning Forward, and prior to working with Learning Forward, Janice was the Strategic Initiative Director for the Education Workforce for the Council of Chief State School Officers. In this role, Janice led the work of assisting states with developing and implementing coherent and comprehensive systems of educator effectiveness. Our next panelist is Seth Gerson. Seth leads federal policy and advocacy work, including on the Every Student Succeeds Act, for the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. Seth joined the National Board in 2010. Prior to coming to the National Board, Seth was the Senior Education Policy Advisor for U.S. Senator Jack Reed from Rhode Island during the time when Senator Reed was a senior member of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. And Steve Robinson joins us from Teach Plus, where he's a Senior Policy Fellow. Steve joined Teach Plus to advise on federal education policy. Steve was most recently an 11th grade physics teacher in New York City. Steve also served as the legislative assistant on education for Senator Obama and then on the Domestic Policy Council at the White House. I told you, this is a very well-qualified group. I wanted to draw your attention to some places where we hope that you'll find as much information to help you in this process as possible. We want to make sure that you know this very important URL that's at the top of this slide, because a lot of the resources that we'll be talking about you can find here. We do have one new update to share, and that is that we have posted the scoring rubric on the Agents for Learning resources pages. So we hope that this will be a useful tool as you put your applications together. Copy of the application is there. We've had over 200 downloads of the application since the competition opened earlier in April. There are FAQs, which, as you know from our earlier webinars, are constantly growing as we get questions from all of you. There are some resources about ESSA from all of our partners. And then there are the archived webinars that we had, one on a ESSA 101 that Steve helped to present back at the end of April, and one that's specifically on professional learning in ESSA that was on the 11th of May. I also just want to note the competition timeline. We're getting to some of these deadline dates. So June 8th at 8 p.m. is when the applications are due. On June 21st, finalists will be notified. And then the actual competition presentations will be held between July 21st and 22nd. So it'll be a day of coaching and teamwork around putting the presentations together. And then on the 22nd, actually presenting your ideas for a panel in Chicago at the Learning Forward Summer Institute. So it's very exciting. The way this process is going to work for our questions today is that we're hoping that you will all use the web chat feature of the webinar to put your questions in. So you have to type your questions in. And our hope is that this will help us to keep them in order so that we can make sure we get to everybody's questions. The other thing is when your question is being answered, there is a raise your hand feature on the Cisco WebEx. And so if for some reason as we're answering the question, you need further clarifying information, I would encourage you to just raise your hand using that feature so that we can come back to you and make sure that we unmute your phone so that you can ask your follow-up question if you need to. I hope that makes sense. And
Melinda, if the hand raising doesn't work, please just type into the chat box. Thank you.
Uh-oh.
Back to you, Melinda.
Yep. WebEx just closed. Don't know why. Sorry. What we thought we would do was to walk through the questions, and in order to give all of you a chance to put your questions into the chat box, we thought we would walk through a couple of the questions that were asked in conjunction with the last webinar that we didn't have a chance to answer at that time. And so the first two have to do with the competition itself. And so Stephanie and Janice, I was hoping we could turn it over to you to tackle these first two questions. You there?
Are you all able to hear? Are you able to hear?
We are. Hi,
yes,
Stephanie.
We are.
I hear you.
Great. Okay, great. So the first question that people asked was how many awards will be made? Janice, do you want to answer that?
Sure. So the awards will be nominal. There will be a number of different awards that we will give out to the finalists. We're going to have 10 teams of finalists that will be invited to come to Chicago, and so all of those awards will be made available to the finalists. So we look forward to having a number of different awards that we can give to all of those who participate in the finals.
Okay, and the second question was about was there any special guidance for public charter schools for this competition?
So since charter schools are public schools, the same guidance would apply to them as to any public school, and we welcome public charter schools in the competition.
Okay, and the next question, so Steve or Seth, you may want to answer this one. This is really about ESSA, and somebody wanted to know about the competitive grants for school leaders. And will those be approved at the federal or the state level? Which one of y'all wants to take that one?
I can take that here, I think. This is Seth from National Board. There's a number of new competitive grants that have been formed out of ESSA. The Teacher Leader and Incentive Fund. This is the successor to the Teacher Incentive Fund that's been around since about 2006 and funded through appropriations. It really looks at human capital systems, the larger professional growth and learning systems, and compensation as part of that. One of the cool things that's in the successor fund that wasn't in some of the funding before is a connection to residency programs, and so really looking at that continuous system of professional learning and growth, not just compensation and not just bonus pay, but really looking at the overall system and how you can improve it. Another one is school leader recruitment and support. This was more of there was a school leader program in the NCLB program, NCLB law. Now that's a successor program to try to give mostly principals and other administrators some professional investment in professional learning for those administrators. And then the SEED program, Supporting Effective Educator and Development. This has funded a number of nonprofits that do work in teacher and principal quality, and to really look again at a systems framework. National Board has been lucky to be award winner out of this, and what we're doing with that money is really looking at how do you take schools and districts and build cores of board certified teachers in there and then have them in leadership positions so they can bring the next generation of teachers along and really build that pathway. So those are three of some of the main programs that have been built out of there. One other one that I'm just thinking of is STEM Master Teacher Corps is also in there. This was a proposal by President Obama a few years ago, hasn't been funded, but it is in the law, and really looking at math and science teachers and how to get districts to really capitalize on the expertise they have in their states and districts and build math and science teacher leaders. So, but I don't know if Steve has some more.
Well, and Seth, those are being funded. The question also was, at what level are those programs funded?
So in the past, Teacher Leader Incentive Fund, the new funding hasn't kicked in yet for new programs. It will be in the next appropriations bill, but Teacher Incentive Fund in the past has received around $250 million, just about on an annual basis, between $200 and $250 million for districts to partner with nonprofits. But again, coming from the federal level to make that decision. I believe the school leader program in the past has received around $15 to $20 million, and the SEED program has seen around $50 million in the past, $54 million in the past. So we'll have to see how their appropriations roll out in the next few months, or by the end of the year. But that's based on previous appropriations.
Okay, and they're all federal grants. So anybody who's applying are applying to the Department of Ed for funding. These aren't coming through the state; they're coming through the Department of Education. Correct?
That's right. So you'll see applications go out. There'll be public comment likely, especially if they're new programs for how they should be structured after there's funding available from the next appropriations bill.
Okay. Ryan, do you want to change to the next slide so they can see the upcoming question?
Can I just add? You're the presenter now. If you can click on the next arrow, please. I see it.
Thank you very much. Yep. Okay. So there's another question, and Steve or Seth again. People were curious at the last webinar about the waivers, and you can see the question in front of you, do they allow LEAs to prorate the funds over the year or only transfer out the proportionate share? Either one of you have a thought about that one?
I'm not sure that I understand the question, actually. Seth?
Yeah, I don't know if I could. I'd have to look back at the FAQs. So one thing, we can point to after this is that earlier this month, the Department of Education put out a series of pretty in-depth, frequently asked questions on details like this. And I think for something like this, we can make that available if that's okay with Melinda and Stephanie and Janice, but I think that would be helpful to just make that as a resource rather than trying to answer too specifically.
That's fine. I think that's great. And Melinda, are you connected back again?
I'm connected by audio, so hopefully, can you hear me?
We can hear you fine. I just
Great.
So are you able to continue to moderate, or do you want me to continue?
I am, thank you. Nope, I'm good. So one question came in, and I think this may have been as I was losing visual, somebody asked me to please clarify that applications are due on June 10th at 8 p.m. So I apologize if I said the wrong information. They are due June 10th, just like the slide said, at 8 p.m. The final question that was asked on the last webinar was having to do with waivers expiring mid-year. What would have happened to plans that wouldn't have been approved without waiver? So does this mean that everything would change? And again, this was a question that came in, so I'm not sure, Steve or Seth, if you all feel like you have enough information to be able to answer that.
Yeah, again, I think the waivers all expire on August 1st, and they're, I point people for very specific questions like this to, Seth mentioned that earlier in May, the department issued a big document, a 30-some page document about transitioning to ESSA, which has specificity about the waivers and the expiration of the waivers. But I believe they're all expiring on August 1st of this year.
I think that's right.
Great.
Yep.
And I see that the folks from the National Board and Ryan put up a link in the chat box, but it looks like there's those FAQs that Seth was mentioning as well. So that may have some good information there.
Okay.
So at this time, we are ready and excited to answer your questions. I haven't seen any come in through the chat box. Are there questions? Please go ahead and put them in there if there are. We can wait a minute to see.
Melinda, while they're writing their questions, we might want to mention to them that the application, the criteria is now on the website.
I did mention that, and I'm happy to put back up that link again so that folks can find it, that the application criteria and scoring rubric are now available on this Agents for Learning competition website. So a question just came in from Michelle King that asked, what is the recommended team size? She had a second question, which is what kind of coaching assistance will we receive in Chicago? Janice and Stephanie, do you all want to take that one?
I think we're having a little bit of trouble with the sound, so I'm wondering, are you all hearing multiple answers from
Sorry,
me?
we're having some feedback as I unmuted people. If you could just give me 1 second, please.
Oh, okay. Got it. Thanks, Ryan. So in terms of the recommended team size, we're imagining that we'll have teams of approximately 5 people. And in terms of what types of coaching will the teams receive in Chicago, so we have a great day-and-a-half plan where teams will have the opportunity to have an individual coach prepare them for their presentations, as well as the opportunity to practice their presentations for other teams that are participating in the finals as well. And I just want to remind everyone that in our view, anybody who is invited to join us in Chicago is a winner. There will not be a distinction among the 10 finalists. Everyone who is identified as a finalist will be one of the winners. And so we will all be together in Chicago to ensure that we get the best 10 plans and presentations to inform decisions that will be made in 50 states, as well as potentially by school districts across the country. So everyone will have a great learning experience in Chicago.
Thanks, Stephanie. We have another question here in reference to the teams. So the question from Constance is, are teaching educators in the application only meant to be K-12 teachers currently in the classroom, or might they include higher education faculty, teachers, or educational service centers, or retired teachers?
Okay, so we expect that every team will have a majority of the team members will be practicing classroom teachers. And teams may have other members, but in order to qualify to participate, you need to have the majority of your team members be teachers on teaching contracts. Something else?
Other questions? Stephanie, one thing that Tracy suggested is if we could share out, or maybe Jana, some of the key points for applicants that are included in the rubric, since that's now available. Maybe you could give us some high-level key points that people should be aware of.
Worth a total of a possible 100 points. And each question in the rubric is broken down into the most important elements in the question. And so for each one, it's also at 3 different levels. So the point system is shown in the rubric. So if the answer is at the 4 to 5 level, it gives the specifics of what would be included in that particular question. If it's from 2 to 3 points, it shows what would be included in that type of response. And then 0 to 1 points would be the least amount of points that you could gain for that particular question. And so by breaking it down, we hope that it clearly describes what our expectations are for each question that you'll be responding to. And if you've looked at the application, you realize that there are 2 questions that are mandatory, the first 2. And the first one has the highest weighting because it's really asking for your vision of what is going to be included in your plan. And then after those first 2 questions, you move into selecting 3 out of 5 optional questions to respond to. And so we'll be, that's up to you which of the 3 that you choose to answer, and any of the 3 are acceptable that you want to answer. And again, it's looking for how comprehensive it is, how complete your thoughts are, how realistic they are in terms of being able to be implemented, how useful they'll be to both state and district and school level leaders who will be implementing the plans in their respective entity. And so we hope that will be helpful to you as you're thinking about ways to respond to the different questions that we've asked for you to respond to. We also believe that it'll be important to look for some other things about the clarity, the way that you present the information, the evidence that you provide, and any examples that you include in there to make it clear to the readers what you're trying to communicate about your priorities and your vision for how to use professional development funds going forward. And I'll be happy to respond to any other specific questions that the listeners may have.
And I will also say that Ryan has let me know that the raising the hand function doesn't seem to be working. So if you have a follow-up question, please go ahead and write it in the chat box so we can make sure to get to it. So here's some questions that are for I think Seth and Steve to field for us. Here's a big one. A question came in with the registration process that wanted to know how ESSA is different from No Child Left Behind.
It is a big question.
A large question.
I mean, the overall answer is that it maintains, the basic concept of No Child, which was, standards-based accountability, is basically maintained. What's really different is that it transfers there's a lot more flexibility, and so a lot more responsibility at the state and local level. So rather than, one of the complaints about No Child Left Behind was the one-size-fits-all accountability system. Now states are required to each come up with their own accountability system by the 2017-2018 school year. So it's a really major shift of authority and responsibility from the federal level to the state level. And I think that's kind of the biggest difference. Assessments in grades 3 through 8 and once in high school are still there, and they're still required to be part of the accountability system. But there's a lot more flexibility for other metrics within the accountability system. So that would be one, I think, really significant example of what's different.
Seth, do you want to add to that? Yep.
Just to add a little bit on the teacher side, in Title II, which is the main funding for teachers and leaders, out of NCLB and now ESSA itself. So one thing that's gone away that wasn't particularly NCLB, but people associate with it is teacher evaluation, which was prescribed more from the federal government. So I think that's a big change. In ESSA, it's now just one of the use of funds that you can use at both the state and the district level. Title II is still sort of a menu of options around professional learning with a more robust professional learning definition. But one thing that is in there is there's an encouragement of a comprehensive approach to take to look at where are the gaps, where in the continuum should you work, how do you link different funds, particularly at the district level. So let's say you're doing beginning teacher support very well, but how are you doing professional learning and growth for your experienced teachers, and how are you getting them into leadership opportunities? Leadership has a number of the 24 menu of options, there's probably 3 or 4 that focus just on leadership and getting career advancement initiatives in place. So there's some more encouragement on pieces that we've talked about in the past on continuum and on the continuum, and again, just sort of looking at a more holistic view of how all those pieces fit together.
Great, thank you. So another question is specific to ESSA is around what changes will ESSA have for special education students and their teachers?
My sense is that it really won't have, special education is really not the purview of ESEA as much as it is of IDEA. So I think there might be some differences in terms of assessments and accountability, but I think really it's pretty limited in terms of changes for students with special needs.
Great. Are there any updates on digital learning components of the new law?
I couldn't
Sounds
answer
like one
that.
we may need to get back to you all,
Yeah.
and we're happy to do that. So we've been getting go ahead.
Again, I don't think there's much specificity around that. There might be some allowable uses of funds about it, but that's certainly not a major component of the new law.
I think that it is more frequently, and I don't have the numbers, but an allowable use of the funding. So I think you're right, Steve, that it has more to do with that it's one of the available options for use of funding, but is different. So Stephanie and Janice, here's a new one. Somebody wants to make sure that they're clear that we're talking about 5 educators to a team. And then the second is asking, what if we are a team of instructional coaches? We are all on a teacher's contract, but are former classroom teachers.
So I'm going to answer this, and then my other sponsors, if you think I've answered it incorrectly, then let's talk about it, in fact. But for the 5 instructional coaches, if they're on a teacher contract, then I would assume they come in as a teacher team. Steve, Seth, are you all in agreement with that?
That sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Then the other thing I want to say is we have funding to support 5-member teams. So we keep talking about this as a 5-member team. But let's say your team is 10 teachers got together and worked on this. That's absolutely fine. Unfortunately, we're only going to be able to fund 5 people coming to Chicago for the finals. So that's just something to think about. But we didn't mean to constrain the size of your team, but we also want you to know our funding constraints in terms of supporting the team at the final event.
Great. Another question that came in earlier today is there a standard for classroom management? Somebody's looking for a source around classroom management. Any thoughts from the expert panel?
I don't really think there's anything around classroom management specifically in ESSA that I know of. Seth?
No, I don't think so either. I mean, I think it's, no, I can't think of a specific mention of it. There might be something more generally about teaching skills, which I think would include that, but I don't think it mentions specifically targeting classroom management.
Another question is around teacher leadership. How can teacher leadership be leveraged to realize the goals of ESSA?
So I want to start with that one by saying, by entering the competition and by being the first groups that get really great suggestions out there about how we should be leveraging the resources and the requirements of ESSA to support better professional learning for all educators and new roles and opportunities for teacher leaders. So we hope this is one example. I'm confident Seth and Steve have others.
I would just build off of maybe what I was saying before about this is really in ESSA Entitled II, a lot of good opportunities that encourage states and districts to build teacher leadership systems. So as part of the competition, as I'm thinking about that, I think that there's a hunger out there for states and districts looking at good models, and as there are those models, your influence in bringing those to the fore and bringing attention to them as part of the competition and otherwise, bringing that to state and district leaders, I think there'll be a lot of interest in it, and I think we know that work's going on out there, so putting a spotlight on it, I think, is critical because ESSA has that lever in it.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the language in Title II and how it's changed from No Child, I think probably largely due to the work of some of the people on this phone call, there's a lot more discussion and kind of a robust discussion of possibilities of teacher leadership as an allowable use of funds in Title II that's really encouraging. And I think this is a case where having a vision of what that might look like and what the advantages of teacher leadership and teacher-led professional development, I think that's something that policymakers could use some input from teachers and educators about how those funds could be used in a different way as one of those allowable uses. So I think there's a real opportunity for some advocacy to get some funding to do things differently under Title II. That's pretty exciting.
Thank you. So one of the questions has to do with the applications themselves. The question is, please share thoughts on evidence to be included, and possibly could you include an example of what evidence might be? And then is this further explained in any of the documents? And I'm assuming you mean the criteria or scoring rubric. Janice or Stephanie, do you all want to take that one?
So I'll take a quick stab because we recognize that the answers are short. And so, you know, a limitation of 500 words or 1,000 words means you're only going to have the opportunity to include maybe 1 or 2 citations. When I think of evidence, I think of, you know, what's the research or what's the experience that you have to back your recommendation. So if there is a case study that has produced some great outcomes that you're talking about, and you want to reference that story or that state or that school district, that could be a form of evidence. Another form of evidence could be research studies that have documented why this kind of professional learning is important. Of course, being from Learning Forward, I would say that the standards are clearly a source of evidence for you in supporting what you would advocate. So those are 3 types of evidence. You all want to add any others?
I think that was very helpful. So another question is, are we writing this for all states or within the context of our own state to be shared with other states to adapt their context?
So let me start, and then others may want to add to that one. So I think, it's going to be easiest for everyone to think about their own state and what they would recommend at their state level, unless they're a multiple state team, which we may have some of those as well. And then when we score, it will be around the ideas, and even if it's just for one state, it's just how deeply and how well and compelling are the ideas that we say, not only is that a great idea for your state, that when you ultimately present it, that it probably has ideas that will be helpful to many states. The same thing would be true as you answer the questions about the district, and you might be thinking about your own district, but the great ideas that you write about your district probably would be then appropriate, because you made such a great case, will be appropriate for other districts as well. So I do think it's easiest to think about your own state to start. And when we all get together in Chicago, then we'll also think about how do we take some of those best ideas and make them more universal and helpful to all states. Anybody want to add anything?
We may have just dropped Melinda. She's calling back in.
I see. Okay, well, I thought there was, somebody asked a question about what about support after we get together in Chicago? Like, is there going to be any support afterwards? And we are working on giving lots of opportunities to everyone invited to Chicago to be able to present within their own state, and then maybe other opportunities at other convenings as well. Janice, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the exciting plans we've heard from some potential partners in this work?
Sure, I'll be glad to. So one of the things that all states are going to be expected to do is to include stakeholders in the development of their plans. And so what we have had interest shown in is being able to replicate this competition at the state and district level across the country. And so that's one way that we'll see more people involved in giving input and also having their voices heard. But specifically with the ideas that you generate, We have both commitments from the Council of Chief State School Officers and the National Association of State Boards of Education to help us disseminate these great ideas to the Chief State School Officers as well as State Boards of Education, where the development of the plans will be housed and the responsibility for submitting those plans will be. And so we think it's important that we record the presentations that will be made in Chicago so that we can share those across the country for others to view and to see what ideas you come up with. We also will be sharing your plans with others so that they can see the great ideas that you come up with. So we're really excited about the possibility for these plans to be shared with teachers, with school leaders, district and state level leaders, and as well as the U.S. Department of Education. Absolutely. Because they're still in the process of developing the final guidelines and requirements for what states have to submit in their plans. So we believe that this work that you're doing will be key to helping shape what professional learning looks like in the future throughout the United States.
Thanks. Melinda, are you back? I'm not sure Melinda's back. Okay.
I think Melinda's phone dropped.
Okay.
Sorry.
So let me see. I'm trying to see who else. Is there any more questions?
Stephanie, this is Melinda. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't know what's going on, but so another question having to do with the state level information came in, and that was how detailed should we be in including state level changes or funding in our application? So I think this is a bit of a follow-up to that question about should this be for our state or in the context of all states? You want to add a little bit to answer that?
So I think what will make a great answer is if you are talking about your state, I think part of it is saying in the past we used our dollars to fund this, and we think it will be in the future, in order to achieve this vision, it will be smarter for us to focus our dollars in this way. So I think that level of information is probably going to be helpful because you're building a case and you're giving real examples of real changes that your state will have to consider. So much of the allocation of these resources is about the tough choices that states will have to make. And so you're telling us why the dollars should be spent on option B instead of option A because B aligns with the vision that you present in question 1.
Great. Thank you. Great answer. Another technical question is, can a person be on 2 different teams or working with a group around 2 different sets of ideas to submit an application? Janice, do you want to take that one?
They can only be on one team, so each person can only be part of one team.
Great. Thank you. Not seeing any additional questions. I'll wait for just a minute. Another question is around the presentations in Chicago. What will the presentations entail for those finalist teams that are selected to go to Chicago?
So I'll start, Janice, and then you can add. So we are still getting some clarity around how to make the best use of the 4 minutes that the finalists will have in front of our judging panel. And the presentation will probably involve taking all the information that you submitted in your application, but then you're going to be using that because we expect by the time we get to Chicago, there will be new guidance out about what the state plans actually need to look like and what the states actually will need to request from districts. And so we expect to see the presentation in Chicago to align with that new guidance. There will be a limited number of slides. Everybody will be allowed the same number of slides to use in the presentation. Presentations will not be scored in any formal way with numbers, but we'll have some fun in the way that in the way that the presenters receive feedback, and there will be opportunities for audience participation in giving feedback to the presenters as well. So we will be sending a lot of specific guidance to the teams when they are selected for the finals. Did I forget anything? Oh, Janice gave me a thumbs up.
Excellent. And then another question about the application is, how are the references and tables handled in the word maximum?
They're going to have to be in the word count. So we're going to encourage people to limit references, to limit tables, just write a compelling answer. You don't have that many words. Give us a great answer.
Great. And then another question, I don't think I've asked this one yet, but is at what point should we involve our State Department of Education and or other stakeholders in the application process?
Well, that's a great question. I think our plan is to actually help you in involving them after the competition. But if you're a finalist, we will think about that and make sure that we address that with the information that we send to you as part of the finals. Those of you who don't make it to the finals will also consider that. Like, you've done all this work, and how we'll encourage you to use the work that you did, even if you are not invited to the finals.
But I would just add that there's nothing that would prohibit you from reaching out to your State Department of Education or your district office or whomever that you want to contact in the development of your application. It's whoever you want to collaborate with. I think is important for you to reach out to them and to get the additional stakeholder involvement, and also the involvement from those who will be writing the application. And that's really up to you if you want to seek their input and their guidance at this point as you're developing it. But there will be a process for sharing that with your states after the competition.
And this is Melinda. One other thing I would add is that in the first webinar that we did, which Teach Plus helped us to put together, they gave a lot of great ideas for how teachers can get involved in the process overall, not just in this competition, but how to make sure that your voice is heard throughout the implementation of ESSA. And so I would encourage looking back at that archive for some of those good ideas as well. I think this is a opportunity for teachers to really take a leadership role and to help shape this law into being implemented in a way that makes sense and empowers teachers. So we certainly encourage taking advantage of all of those opportunities. So another question about the State Department is, how can we find out how our state is currently using their Title II money?
That's a really good question. Steve or Seth, do you have the answer to that?
Unfortunately, there's not like
right.
Unless Steve knows of one, there's no sort of neutral database that keeps all that information. I'd have to look at, there is a Title II landing page at the department that sometimes has previous applications, but I don't know how far it dates back. Typically on each State Department of Education website, which may mean some digging, they do have how their application to the federal government of how they're going to use those funds, or it's not an application, but it's a a register of how districts are using those funds and what guidance they're providing. So that would be, I guess, what I would say. Not the best answer of like a one page you can go to, but State Department Ed pages and then the federal site, U.S. Department of site.
Yeah, and this is Steve. I used to ask this question a lot in a previous job, and I think the answer is that there are kind of general buckets. You can get some sense of how the money is used overall, but the reports from the states, at least to the U.S. Department of Education, are relatively brief and relatively high level. So it's really hard to get specific information about how the money is spent overall, I think. And the department has some information about kind of overall how Title II money is spent. You know, a lot of it is spent on class size reduction, but specifics about how that's used at the district and state level, I think, are pretty sketchy and hard to dig up.
So one of the things you might do as entering the competition is contact your State Department and tell them, ask who is the person who's predominantly in charge of Title II, and see if they can give you a report. See if they can share with you their current plan for Title II. Also within your local school district, there should be some documentation of how they are spending their Title II dollars. Having served on a school board, we had to approve how we were going to expend our Title II dollars. So I think it's great if you do ask those questions, because it's going to alert. That's like the first step in teacher agency. It's going to alert the State Department that you're going to be paying attention to, from this point forward, how are we spending our Title II dollars.
Great. Any other questions? I know we're coming up on the hour, and so I just want to make sure there's no last questions we need to get in.
So I guess to expand on the last answer and hearing what Stephanie said, I think the sense is that there's been very little transparency and very little accountability for how Title II money has been spent. And asking those questions at the state and district level, I think, is a really powerful concept, really powerful idea. So.
Yep. All right. Last chance. And in the meantime, I'm just going to switch. I want to make sure that we thank all of our partners in this effort. You can see them there on the screen. Many of you probably have heard about this competition through these wonderful organizations that are supporting it. I think one of the amazing things about this competition is how strongly everybody that's been involved has felt about the need for teacher voice in this process. And to what Steve just described, to what Stephanie described, we really have an opportunity here to make sure that this is done well, and we're counting on all of you as agents for learning to really help us with that effort. And so I thank all of our partnering organizations, and I thank all of you all for taking the time to be with us today and to participate in the competition. And we're really excited and looking forward to seeing your applications coming in the next couple of weeks. If you have questions that we did not answer today or that you hadn't thought of until you get into some process of filling out your application, you always can reach back out to us with your questions through that Agents for Learning website. So please let us know if there's things that we can help you with. I really want to thank all of the panelists today. Seth and Steve, your ESSA knowledge is fantastic, and we really appreciate your giving guidance here and on an ongoing basis as an advisor to us. And so thank you very much for your time. And Stephanie and Janice and all the folks at Learning Forward, we're thrilled to be partnering with you on this. I think it's very exciting, the response we're getting, and I look forward to working with you closely as these applications come in. So thank you to everybody for participating today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for the opportunity.
All right. Thanks, everybody. This concludes this webinar then.